Hey, welcome to Lab, the podcast. So good to be back with everybody. It's one of my favorite times of the year. We're tiptoeing closer and closer towards the Christmas holiday, right in Advent season. And I'm honored to be here with a new friend. Conor Sweetman is the Director of Innovation at Christianity Today and the founder of Ekstasis magazine. He lives over in the UK with his wife and enjoys thinking about artistic and literary things. Studied English. That's what he got his bachelor's in at Tyndale University and went on to a master's at York University. And that's the formal bio. But as I said, Conor's a new friend. We got to spend some time over around the Symphony Project. And Conor and his wife both just won Cami and I's respect and admiration. And we had had a growing respect and admiration just through knowing Ekstasis. But Conor, what an honor to have you here. We're grateful for you and so grateful to have shared some time in person, not on Zoom. But thanks for being here.
Yeah, it's been unreal to get to know you guys, and thanks for the invitation to Brno. That was a memory for a lifetime.
Yeah, it's like I said that we have to do two podcasts because we literally, Ekstasis magazine has had such an impact on so many people. And your work as the founder and the visionary behind that has impacted people all over the world. Our team, particularly, has been impacted. And so many of us, before knowing you, were being just encouraged in our faith and invited into wonder in so many different ways through your work. And so it was wild to get then to know you and a little of the backstory and hear some of just the climb that has taken place. So I said we're going to do a second podcast, if you're willing, on just the story of Ekstasis and what God is doing and your vision for that. But we might have to add a third because Brno was wild, like to be making a symphony with people that are just becoming friends. It was pretty cool.
Yeah. No, it's crazy seeing people that knew about Ecstasis already apart from me, because it always still feels, even though it's something now, it's something in the ether, it always just feels like a project I started up in my bedroom and worked on evenings and weekends. So it's crazy to realize that it's actually positively affecting people in Tampa and people in Canada and across the US. So it's really special.
Yeah. It's, I mean, when we say impact, I think one of the beautiful things about art, about literature, is that that work stands. And it takes so much effort to curate something and to be very thoughtful about each word and each image and to present
Yeah.
something. But then it stands. And I've got the copies of Ekstasis, those original print copies that you shared with us. And they're just treasures. They invite you into wonder, and you have that gift. That's kind of the conversation for today. That's the bridge, is that as the director of innovation for Christianity Today, you're stewarding multiple projects in addition to Ekstasis. And we're right on the threshold entering the Advent season. And each year, our team selects an Advent devotional to just walk us through as a team, and then invite people from our community to walk through together the season of Advent. And this year, A Time for Wonder, which is the devotional from Christianity Today, the days of Advent through the eyes of worship. This is the devotional that we're going to be going through. And you happen to be the editor, and this is one of the projects that you stewarded behind the scenes. So this will be podcast one. I would love to just invite you to help us kind of prepare to see through that lens of wonder in this time of Advent. So we'll get into that. But before we do, talk a little bit about your journey to this moment, right? Where you are stewarding projects for Christianity Today and Ekstasis. If you went back 10 years, would you have imagined that you would be involved in these type of projects? Like, take us back 10 years ago and maybe where were you and what were you, what direction were you rowing in? Would it be a surprise to Conor 10 years ago that you'd be here today?
Mm, Good question. It would definitely be a surprise because 10 years ago I was going through a crisis of faith. So the fact working for a Christian organization would have been definitely on the radar. But I think at the time I was working out where my artistic sensibilities interacted with my spiritual longing, the faith that I'd grown up with, but also the faith that I was reworking at a time where I was figuring out my own obedience and desire to follow the Lord. So, anyways, all this to say, you would be surprised because the fact that something that eventually, maybe 8 years ago rather than 10 years ago, when I'd finally decided that I did want to follow Christ, I wanted to intermingle my artistic desire with something tangibly spiritual and the rhythms of spiritual life. I put out that first issue of Ekstasis. It was 20, 30 pages. It was just a tiny little magazine that I'd invited a couple university friends to submit their writing and their photography. I remember one image in the final printout was terribly pixelated. It was completely not rendered properly. The design, the layout was all very chaotic. So the fact that now I have a team around me that helps to put out these absolutely phenomenal print products that are deeply, yeah, just deeply poured over on the design front, but also I get to bring some of my editorial sensibility and help shepherd writers through the process and give people new opportunities that I could have never imagined myself getting 10 years ago. That is just a real full circle moment for me. And I think yeah, it's just crazy to realize how much God has blessed my humble offerings that I truly thought were gonna go nowhere. I just had a passion for word and text and photography and visual art that could stir my soul in a way that I was being stirred by quote unquote non-Christian work or secular work. I was like, let's create a space that people with this deep spiritual longing for the Lord to actually put their skills to use in a way that I wasn't fully seeing at the time. I think when I entered the environment of Christian creators and the ecosystems of literary journals, I've learned a lot about how much work was actually going on. But being able to offer a little bit of a digitally savvy, a little bit of a modern aesthetic to this work that's been going on in the background for 20, 30, 50, 100 years has been, yeah, an honor of a lifetime. And just on the last note, it is funny because um, when I was finishing up university, I would have said, as a Canadian, I was outside of the American intellectual Christian creative ecosystem. And so I said to myself, I would just love to work for an organization like Christianity Today one day. That would just be like a dream come true. And so that was obviously when I decided that I wanted to be a Christian and follow that. But just to get that email from the CEO of Christianity Today about 4 years ago now is yeah, just a crazy full circle moment that I could have never imagined.
Yeah. There's so many things in that story that I think everybody listening, one thing to pay attention to is just that little note that we would have, that we could so easily breeze by. But 8 to 10 years ago, you said I was in a crisis of faith and trying to wrestle through things, decide like where is the highest affection of my heart? Where's the line of sight going to be for my life? You were in that moment 8 to 10 years ago, and today we're having this conversation, and this a time of wonder is literally being distributed to, I think we said over 100,000 people have 100,000 copies of this Time for Wonder devotional, and Ekstasis magazine's reach, right, is expanding and expanding. And so I just caught that thinking, man, how many of us sitting in the
Mm,
moment that we're in have no idea what God's about to do, what he's calling us to, what's unfolding, and that whole idea of providence and just like not having an overconfidence on our vantage point, but
mm,
recognizing like we have a limited view, God's at work, and be humble and open because there may be things that he's calling us to or something that he's doing that you had no imagination for. This, you wouldn't have thought that you'd be involved in projects like this. I love
mm.
that. And
Well, I
the
mean,
go ahead.
just really quickly, I think the dual reality of kind of showing the affection of your heart. So putting things into the ether that kind of show this is where my heart is, and then just letting God and obedience and providence carry the way forward and doing your tiny part, your small offering, and then letting God do whatever he wants with that is really amazing.
It's beautiful, and we can replicate that. I think that's one of the cool things that Ekstasis is a work that's particular. Like God has called you to that, and you have a particular gifting and preparation to prepare you to offer that. And at the end of the day, somebody else is going to do a similar thing, like humbly with pixelated images or whatever their version of that is. Start to bring what they have and trust that God will develop it and mature it. And that's just a good thing. At the time, with the artistic side, wonder being kind of the thread in this conversation, you think about artistic and literary things. So 8, 10 years ago was a part of the crisis of faith that there was more. Were you finding more wonder and being drawn more by voices outside of the faith that seemed to
Mhm.
be richer and deeper and more imaginatively alive? Was that a part of the crisis of faith? Is that this felt like more of a impoverished or desert landscape, and felt more fertile ground? So I was
Mhm.
naturally attracted there and struggling. Was that a part of the story for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. It was definitely a part of it, and I think after going through kind of a cool, powerful, quote unquote, charismatic couple years in high school, and experiencing the relationship with God on a visceral level, when I went into this crisis of faith and figuring out where my obedience lied, I was still wanting to find where that kind of vivid, visceral soul connection was happening. And it was in the arts, it was in music, it was in film and books, that just stirred. I can only describe it as just this warmth in my chest, like it was something was being profoundly stirred in me. And I was finding, because I wasn't looking hard enough, but the commercialized version of Christian creative work felt so often more plastic than human. And so just that stirring of wonder, because I always knew that God was the ultimate wonder, and ultimately, like, my affections did belong and were ultimately found in Him. There was just this layer of, I guess, modern Western churchianity, Christianity that just wasn't resonating with me. And I was wondering why that was and why I was being stirred by all this non-Christian work created by people that weren't in tune with the ultimate beauty, the ultimate wonder. Um, and so I think everyone goes and even non-Christians, it's not like they have this key to the arts that we don't have. It's like the human condition is to feel dissatisfied and feel that craving for the transcendent. And I think maybe non-Christians, especially in the arts world, can sometimes be more honest about that craving and then find temporary satisfaction or temporary methods of getting that transcendence. Whereas for Christians, we're sometimes more okay with the pseudo transcendence, when we're actually still craving the ultimate transcendence. So yeah, that all definitely factors into my path, to where I am now with a time for wonder and that ultimate circularity of existence. I've been thinking a lot about time and just the way that we see life as a horizontal or a vertical line as opposed to a circular rhythm. So yeah, it's been really cool to allow that to come forth in the actual my day-to-day work for a job. I get to I get to ponder these really deep concepts and then hopefully allow other people to enter in them as well.
Yeah. It's in all of those different stories that you're describing there with the arts. I go back to there's a book called The Idea of the Holy by Rudolf Otto, and he talks about having a rational and a non-rational encounter with God. And you talk about that visceral encounter, and that there was something that moved you in this
Mhm.
early, and you were searching for where is that. And I think that you're right that there maybe in secular spaces in the past, I think that's changing. I think Ekstasis is evidence of this. Your work at Christianity Today, I will say this: the intuition of Christianity Today's leadership to invite you to be a contributor at a high level to the work of Christianity Today. I'll just like ping that, like, well done, because there has been a dominant voice that's been more rational driving the conversation about faith in the West. And it's left a vacuum a little bit, an empty part of the house for that
Mhm.
non-rational, which is a right part, imagination preceding reason. It's part of who we're made to be. And if we just give up that ground and we don't attend to that, we're not being faithful to who God's made us to be and who He is, right? Ineffable outside our contained language for Him. So many
Mhm.
amazing things I think that are represented of what God is doing. And as you have kind of followed him faithfully towards that rational and non-rational encounter, I think that's what I like about the literary work is that there's the word and the image and the feeling and the evocative language and the
Mhm.
poetic, all of it's contained in and it's possible to contain. Sometimes we go, well, words won't contain that. Well, poetry does, and prose that's written beautifully has the ability to touch that rational and non-rational, and I think that you do that well. I love your thought on time. I think for people who are listening to this podcast, it's cool to think that there's a return back to and a desire for a sacredness to time that's not, maybe we would say, commercialized time or tech driven time, but it's the church as the keeper of time was a reality, that there was a sacred rhythm to reality. And that we moved in a linear way beyond that. We kind of grew out of that in the West, and there's a return back to reality. It's not like recovering some other thing. It's just that reality, it does not function like that, that we pass by these things again and again and again, but we change. In your
Mhm.
own experience growing up, was Advent and the liturgical calendar of the church a part of your experience growing up, or was this something that came later in life to you?
Mhm. Yeah, it's so funny. My friends and family who know me know that I'm actually not a huge Christmas guy. Like I enjoy it obviously, but I've met so many people now and always, but they're just diehard Christmas fans. They just get excited early November for the rest of the season. I have always enjoyed it, but it is funny because my dad, um, really, even though we went to a Christian and Missionary Alliance church growing up, so just like your general evangelical Protestant, but he was always super drawn to the liturgical. And what felt annoying as a kid was the fact that he loved it so much that as kids, we wouldn't open our presents on December 25th. We would open our presents on January 6th, I believe, which is celebrating Epiphany, which is representative of the three wise men, or is it the three kings or the three wise men? One of them bringing their gifts to Jesus, the Jesus child, and then the passing of the gifts in the family was representative of that giving of gifts to Jesus, the child. So it's again a hilarious full circle moment where what felt like a grumbly moment as a kid, like why do we have to wait till January 6th? Everyone else gets to open their presents on December 25th. I think that ultimately set up the template of how I see Christmas time, but how I see life in general that I've not just now recently kind of gotten back in touch with and fully seen the beauty of. So I grew up with a pretty high awareness of this liturgical calendar, especially around Christmas. We would light the Advent candles once per week, the joy, love, hope, and Christ candle, I guess. Um, so that, yeah, really set the background for me to be able to at CT when I was kind of tapped I wasn't aware that I was going to be put in this position. They're like, "Can you just handle the Advent and Easter devotionals?" I was like, oh, "Okay, I'm not a super Christmassy guy, but I have enough of kind of a deep sense of awareness of how this will work that I can hopefully." provide a little bit of a deeper experience than the average evangelical Protestant is used to doing with this awareness of liturgical time. So it is cool that God, I guess, prepared me all the way in childhood to have that sense of, okay, yeah, Christmas is more than just the week leading up to Christmas. It's more than just the morning when you're opening the gifts. It does have just this embeddedness in ultimate reality. As you say, it's getting back in touch with the rhythms and flows of the way God's created us as humans and allowing us to pause, be aware of what's actually happening on like a transcendent level, and then tune our hearts to that rhythm.
Mm. I like the idea of tuning our hearts to that rhythm, and we say things like that, and you you describe an experience as a child where there were certain things happening and they stuck a bit more than even just like an intellectual reality. But your dad curated something that slowed you down and ordered time, literally, that we're going to wait when other people are going. We're going to wait. What is that, right? And I
Mhm,
think that the part of what is interesting about our moment is that intuitively, I think about poetry. Robert Frost. Poetry is a way of remembering what it would impoverish us to forget, and poetry sticks in a way. And I think the liturgical rhythms of the church, an embodied practice of something, sticks in a way that makes you helps you remember maybe when seasons of life change or there's complexity or tragedy, or it's a way of marking time and remembering what story you're in. And I think that's the beauty of the church calendar of saying, hey, we're going to enter into a season of Advent, a season of expectation and wonder, and that's going to prepare us in a particular way, and then we're going to make the corner to epiphany and to light coming and everybody being drawn to it, and it's going to carry us into a season that's going to break our hearts and pierce our hearts with Lent and the passion, and then there's a resurrection and the hope of triumph and new life and a new
mhm,
first day, an octave higher, a new creation that starts, and then we enter into another fruitful season until we come to draw back into a time of wonder and remember. And as you said, we pass by these things year after year after year, and it's a way of remembering what it would impoverish us to forget.
mhm,
And if we strip those things out, then we're trying to hold on to an idea in our brains that is fragmented from our bodies. And I think that that's what I am so excited about for a time of wonder, is that you're inviting families, maybe many who didn't grow up with this tradition or with any awareness of a liturgical calendar or sacred time. That might be very foreign, but Christianity today is saying, hey, in an ecumenical way, doesn't belong to a tradition. This is a
mhm,
way of thinking about what is real
mhm,
and slowing us down. So, just talk a little bit about how you did that, right? So, the idea is that one way of bringing us into that season and slowing us down and marking time is to invite everybody to share in reflection leading to, when you start, I think back in February is what you said, like you're literally sitting down and given this project. How did you start? Where did you start to
mhm,
curate a time of wonder?
mhm. Well, I really like what you said about the poetry lingering in the body even, and it shows you something that you don't know you need to know, or it's taking something that you think you know and actually allowing it to go deeper into you. And so with this Advent devotional, it it's my second one that I've done with CT. It will also be my last one because I'm moving on to some other projects as well. But each year you can kind of think to yourself, okay, how are we going to talk about Christmas in a way that even has a semblance of freshness or intrigue? Like, why are people going to want to go through a new devotional? Why are they going to pay for it? So you have to think through how to take these ancient eternal truths and create a framework around them in accordance with the framework that's already there, and then bring some level of freshness or accessibility to it. And so for this year, I think it actually started this past Lent slash Easter. I was working on that devotional, and this idea of Easter in the everyday was top of mind for me, and I was thinking through just the principles of Easter as it relates to your everyday life. And then I had that framework of what does Christmas mean at different times of the day? So you
Mhm.
have the monthly calendar, you have the yearly calendar, but then you also have the daily rhythms of even your emotional realities are very different from the morning to the afternoon to the evening. And so how can we tap into that daily experience throughout the month of December? So kind of layering, yeah, the hourly, the daily, and then the monthly, and then ultimately the yearly. And so, um, and I might be getting too in the weeds here, but I was really thinking through what the emotional tenor of each of these times of day is. So I started with the morning. How do I normally feel in the morning? You're ready for renewal. You're ready to take on the day. You've rested. You're in a state of renewal and energy. Hopefully, unless you're not a morning person at all. So we structured the first quarter of the devotional to be a time of renewal. What are the truths that Christmas time have for us in the morning? Moving on to the afternoon, I was just imagining Israel in the time of an afternoon in the obviously Christmas didn't actually happen around the winter, it didn't happen around December, but ultimately I was thinking of what a hot day in Israel would be like. You're probably working in the fields, you're working on land, on water, in the home, whatever. It's usually the time where you start to get tired. You're starting to have the labor of love be more maybe labor than love at that point. So I was just thinking through my own. I always have this thing, and Emily Dickinson has this line about there's a certain slant of light. And I can't remember the full poem, but that line, there is a certain slant of light, and then the rest of the poem is pretty depressing. And there's something about like a 2 p.m., 3 p.m. slant of light through a window for me, a late afternoon feeling that always feels like slightly oppressive. It always feels like I'm tired, the world kind of feels a little meaningless. I don't know how to describe it, and I might be alone in this, but I usually have like an afternoon slump where the trials of life feel a little more poignant. So we sectioned number two section as a time of trial.
Mm.
And then finally, the evening comes, and for myself, that's where I start to get some speed again. I start to be excited about what the evening holds. It's more comfortable, it's more cozy, especially here in the UK. It gets dark early. You kind of settle in for the night, and you're excited for what's to come. Hopefully, you have a nice dinner with family, whatever. You do some late night activity, or not late night, like evening activities. You go out again. So, what does the evening hold? And I believe, and I'm blanking on it right now, but I believe we did a time for renewal, a time for trial, a time for revelation. Um, and that was also drawing on this idea of Jesus' birth was heralded and revealed in the fields to the shepherds during the evening, a time of revelation, excitement, anticipation, what's to come. And then ultimately you fall asleep, and so you're not cognizant for that. But the fourth session or the fourth quarter of the devotional is ultimately the time that Christmas is as a whole, a time for wonder, a time where the ultimate revelation of God's humanity, it allows us to live in wonder for the rest of the year because we can, yeah, just abide in Jesus' love and the humanity that he came on to take for us. And then we can take from that a state of wonder that will then propel us through the rest of the year. So that was kind of the framework that we constructed to lay out the time of days, the time of the month, and then the time of the year. And then as the submissions started coming in for the devotionals, we yeah, just slotted them into the different times of day and hopefully created a coherent flow from morning to afternoon to evening to the rest of life.
Mm. It's awesome to hear. This is why I said I'm honored to share this time, and we had to kind of chop up the podcast conversations with you because there's so much to talk about. And just this project, A Time of Wonder, one of the things I love about time with artists, time with people who are making, is that what a treasure to hear the backstory, because so many times somebody gives us something or recommends something and we're like, okay, great, something, hopefully it has a good beautiful cover, it draws you in, right? And you're curious and enchanted by it and you dive in. Maybe not, right? But when you know the story of Connor in February being given this task and starting to think about, well, how do we approach that this year? And then so much prayer, thought, intention, conversation, collaboration, setting up a framework. I don't think you're alone in the noonday devil. I mean, that deep in the Christian tradition is the malaise of the afternoon and the slumber that comes at noonday, and how we can fall asleep and lose our sense of wonder. So much richness just in the structure and the framework and the scaffolding for how the story comes together. So again, as a way of recovering a beautiful relationship between art and our life of faith, slowing down enough to just, when you take something, don't, just like a good meal, don't just grab it and start eating. Like, consider, like, why the cover, why the words, why the
Mhm.
structure, why these voices, because it's all being thoughtfully and carefully prepared for us. I mean, so thank you for the work and for curating it with that, and for helping us see a little bit of the backstory. When you were kind of imagining this going out, was there is there a hope that you and your team had? Like, when you did you have conversations where you said, like, a measure of impact or success for us as we kind of try to quantify these things? I think more imaginatively of, like, were you thinking about a family reading this together? Were you thinking about somebody who's lonely at university and it's super dark at night and they can't get home that year and they are longing for something else? Like, who did you have in mind as an audience? And maybe what was your hope for people as they read this year? And this is, again, you said this is maybe the last time, for, in your view, where you'll curate something like this. So what was your hope for all of us who might pick it up? What were you imagining for the reader?
Yeah, it's really cool, how something as seemingly crass as marketing tactics or the sales that come in, they actually really give a picture of the people behind the numbers, the people behind our marketing efforts. So it's really special for this Advent devotional. What usually ends up happening is maybe three-quarters of the sales are through churches buying a coffee for their whole congregation to go through it together. Whether in small groups, whether in sermon series on Sundays. And then about a quarter of them, and I might be wrong on the numbers, but about a quarter are single coffee sales that are just picked up by people who just see this on the internet, or their friend told them to buy it, and it's like, oh yeah, I definitely want one of these. And so the framing that you just said about a lonely university student kind of not being able to get home, I picture those people as the people that right before Christmas, unfortunately, we're sold out now, but usually we get a few kind of last minute trickling in of sales. And I always imagine those to be the people that just discovered, oh, wow, this was really interesting. This is kind of a cool way to approach the Christmas season on my own in a way that feels a little bit more. They might not be in the church currently. They might have been burned by the church or whatever, but they still want to have this season in a time of reflection. And so I'm going to answer your question in a very roundabout way. But even the introduction that I actually forgot to mention, but I wrote a little introduction about how Ecclesiastes is something that you're not often thinking about at Christmas. You don't often think about the rhythms and the forms of the different times that are necessary for our life at Christmas time. It's just you're so in the hustle and bustle of the moment. It's so hard to think outside of that moment. But even a time for wonder is drawing upon this idea of there's a time for laughter, a time for crying, a time for death, for birth, a time for planting, a time for sowing. And so I think I was imagining this devotional hopefully reaching people in the wide gamut of the possibility of their emotional life. So
Mm,
if you're If you're at an empty table, this is not the Christmas that you imagined, you can resonate with this time of trial, this time of suffering. If this is a time of new life and new birth and excitement in your family or your church, you can resonate with this time of revelation or time of renewal. And then this idea of we structured it so that it had um, or like reflection questions at the end of each week. So you can write in the actual devotional. We have blank spaces. Um, and so that's either a person in their bedroom writing it as a diary entry, or it's a small group of 10 people at church meeting up on a Monday night, Tuesday night, and going through the questions together and asking them, oh, which character did you most resonate with this? Because the other element that I won't get too far into, we really tried to have each of these devotionals focus on one character, not fictional character, but whether it's Mary at the point of announcement of the angel, whether it's Jesus as a child and getting lost in the city, and Mary and Joseph and their very human parenthood, whether it's Zechariah being struck dumb when he realized that he's going to give birth with Elizabeth to John. So each of these, they're character centric moments, try to capture the emotional life of the character at the time in the biblical story, and then how does that both stand on its own, but then resonate with our experience as individuals or in community at the time that we're in.
Mm. It's so fun. This is so fun for me to think about. Uh, just again, first, I want to go back and celebrate Christianity today and the intuitive, excellent leadership. Right, Ian McGilchrist wrote "Master and His Emissary," and we've been in this left brain dominant culture and lost the imaginative right brain. All that stuff that we could nerd out about, but in the practical and applicable reality of that, you could, you're like, well, marketing and numbers and metrics and all that stuff, we can overly emphasize those, but at the same time we can underemphasize those. And like you said, those things, every single data point is a person, right, who is resonating with art and engaging in something, and a conversation is being had there between those of us who are patrons of the art, participants of the faith, and artists who are contributing something so thoughtfully, which is their gift, right, to invite us into all these different ways to look at something and imagine something. So again, well, I think it's a great representation of a correction from that, master and his emissary left brain to right brain dominance, to say, like, let's bring the poetic knowledge and the scientific knowledge, the right and the left hemisphere. Let's think about things with imagination and reason. And we can have a metrics conversation to say, this is going to land in so many different places and be distributed in so many different ways. So let's be thoughtful about that. But let's let that kind of be served by the beautiful story then that we say, well, what do we want to share and how do we want to irrigate those different spaces? So that's a whole side. Just well done, well done, well done. And again, I'm calling us to pay attention to it because that's not just incidental, right? You have to have a Conor Sweetman working in a particular role, which is costly. Somebody has to say that's important. We can't steward things with this kind of thought and intention and artistry just haphazardly or incidentally. That's not how it happens. And so the return of the craftsperson to the table as in a C-suite to say, how do we think about these things? That should be a part of everybody's conversation. So well done. And I love the costly nature of that, and what it produces. And what I'm excited about is thinking, okay, everything that you just set up for us, we get to participate in it not alone. And there's this universal nature of the church, the Catholic nature in the sense of the universal faith that we share. We were just in Brno, as we said, and one of the most incredible things about this experience is there were 92 different people on the floor. We got to sit up in this balcony, over 100-year-old, beautiful European symphony hall, just unreal experience. And so Connor and his wife and our kids and our team were all in this balcony watching 92 different individual people tuning, right? A particular instrument. And so each one is an instrument of this beautiful thing that's going to take place. But there's a moment of tuning where everybody's being harmonized into a universal whole. And for a moment, that the whole thing just swells and you can hear them being brought to one. And I think about John 17 and just the oneness, the Catholic nature, the universal nature of the body of Christ, all being tuned, and our hearts being tuned to a particular moment. And I think that's what's happening through a time of wonder. Advent is this tuning all of our hearts in a particular note for this moment. It's not every part of the Christian story, but it is a particular part of the story. And I just love that. You think about the billions of people on earth, or you think the hundreds of thousands of people who will hold this,
Mhm.
and all of the families represented around those, or the quantifiable units, the people that make up those data points, all being tuned. 92 blew me away. But think about the hearts of 100,000 people being tuned to wonder and to
Wow.
anticipation for what God is doing, right? If we could hear that cosmically, right, in the heavens. And I think that that's part of what's so exciting about Advent. We've lost the sense that that is a reality, the visible and the invisible world. What if every human heart was tuned to wonder and anticipation for the coming king? What does that sound like in the universe, right? And in the heavenly realms when our hearts are tuned like that. So this is the work that's being done so well. Conor, talk just really briefly. How did you bring together the voices that would help tune us in that way? Because you didn't just pick a voice, you chose to curate a particular chorus of voices to help tune our hearts. How did you make those choices? What was the approach that you took, and who are these people?
I'm glad that you asked because I was gonna reflect on that note of the symphonic reality of both Advent as a whole, but then within this booklet, this couldn't have happened without the 21, 22 different writers that provided incredible devotionals. And so it was really special for me in my work with Ekstasis, which our idea is to see our faith through a poetic lens once again. So taking these the tool of writing, which a lot of people use, obviously, but allowing it to be a bit more poetic than the Christian industry normally allows, and be more testimonial and being more hopefully reflective of true literature. And so we built up a great stable of writers and thinkers and artists who are in our community. And in past issues, and I don't know how much I can expand on this, but in past issues with CT, we always do try to bring in some level of familiar voices that the average American Christian will might recognize. Um, but with this one, we kind of took a slightly different approach and just said, hey, let's um, fully just have this next generation of storytellers put their pen to the page, be as poetic as they want, so to speak, even within the standards of of a devotional, and just kind of let the water go where it will. And so essentially, I've kind of gathered a group of artists that I've trusted through past publications with Ekstasis, and then I kind of gave them this call, hey, this is the framework that we're thinking, a time for wonder. We want people to reflect on their day-to-day experience of Advent in parallel to these characters in the Bible and the emotional realities going on and how that points us to the ultimate wonder. Do whatever resonates with you. Pick your character on a spreadsheet. We laid out a framework for them. They entered their name on which one they wanted. So all this to say, this has been kind of a 5-year process of slowly gathering a community of like-minded writers that understand we want to go a little bit more poetic, a little bit more lingering, a little bit deeper, and not put out kind of a super commercialized, flat devotional that, again, I'm not against that by any means. I'm just saying we wanted to probe a little bit deeper, go a little bit more imagistic, imaginative, and work together in like-minded unity to allow people to enter in Advent through a different poetic lens. So all this to say, I'm not really answering your question, but I drew on this community of writers that I've come to love and appreciate so well over the last 5 years, and they really came to the plate and they hit a home run. Hopefully, I hope that you agree with that.
Yeah, no, I do, and I love it. I think you experience this. That's happening everywhere. I love that there's thousands more. Right? There's some renaissance taking place with all of us. Just the people who long for wonder and hunger for the deep mystery and beauty and reality of the Christian faith. It's the rock that we stand on and the mystery that allures us forward and enchants our hearts. And so many of us are feeling that. And you get around 25 of us went to Brno together from our little group, and we're so different. All of us are different spaces, different demographics, different approaches and experiences, and yet we share this common thing. And to think that there's so many writers, so many artists, and that you gave a little platform for that. Again, wonderful approach. I wish we had more time, a time for wonder, the days of Advent through the eyes of worship. Beautiful. It's sold out, unfortunately. So we're putting this podcast out, and people are going to be like, yes, I want to get it. Hopefully, you already got it. Our
There
team's going to be
is, I
going
will
through.
quickly say, there is a digital license that you can also get. So if you want the PDF, if you want to share with your church, that's available as well.
That's awesome. Thank you for that, because I think, yeah, there's a hunger. So if you missed the print copy, then find that digital. We'll put that link in so that we can make sure that people can get that easily. And if your church has not yet done something, I think this is a great invitation. So, Connor, I want to leave it with this question, because you think artistically in a literary fashion, and I'm thinking about the person who's going, okay, I thank you for this. I wasn't quite thinking about Advent. I wasn't thinking about an approach to Christmas, but I want to try to do something in my home. And I want to ask you, in a sensory way, just for Connor the person, for you and your family, pairing something kind of wine and cheese or a dessert and a particular flavor, savory and sweet. Like, when you engage literature, when you engage devotional, when you engage in a posture like you imagine people sitting down to read this, what's another sensory part of that experience that you're going to attend to? Is it the way that you light a room? Is it the way that something smells? Is there some other note that you try to hit when you want to put yourself in a posture to not just take something in through one dimension, but to experience it immersively? And so maybe that can be helpful for somebody else thinking like, how do I make this special and other, rather than just like, we're going to read this, in a normal place. What's a note that maybe is a good pairing that you're going to try out for this?
That is a very good question. Well, as you're saying that, it just really brings to mind this beautiful London setting of they start their twinkly lights in late October, early November. And just last week I was around Holborn Station in
Hmm.
London, and they had huge star displays over the city. And I think in my mind, when I read this in the comfort of my own home, with probably a YouTube version of a crackling fire on the TV because we don't have an actual fireplace. But those twinkling lights in our home that are also reflected in the bigger city of London, which were also reflected in the actual sky on Earth, and then were reflected in the same experience of the shepherds with the final announcement of Jesus coming in the when the angels announced it. I just think that movement of artificial lighting that does create a warmth that invites you to think of the true lighting that is across the sky, the same sky that existed when the angels announced it to the shepherds. So that's a roundabout way of answering, but I just love nice lighting. And so the lights in London really deeply bring me into that spiritual mood of Christmas.
Yeah, it's calling. That's cliche to say, but all of us are like, "Oh, I wish," right? That we could just go. Here's the thought. I thank you for that. Like, lighting. That's the invitation. Take a time of wonder, but think about that. Light has come. Light into the darkness. A great light has dawned, and we don't look at these things. We look through them. And so just pay attention. I love that invitation that the twinkly light on the street isn't just, instrumental. There's something it's pointing beyond to. So maybe enjoy this experience of wonder with a hint of light, whatever that means in your home. Try that out. And all of us are artists in some way, and we can explore that. So, Connor, thank you so much. We'll come back at some point, maybe after the holiday, for what I hope and can't wait for, which is a deep and rich conversation about ecstasis. We're just so grateful for you and your work. But thank you for your work on this project. It's beautiful, and we can't wait to share it with you and the hundreds of thousands of people that are going to be engaging it together. So thanks.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.